Welcome to a night of total terror.
In 1967, a 27-year-old college dropout from the Bronx named George A. Romero directed a low-budget horror film.
Night of the Living Dead.
The film introduced the world to a new kind of monster.
Persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder.
The flesh-eating zombie. This spawned an entire genre of TV shows and movies, novels, comic books, video games, and zombie conventions, thriving industries to this day.
Don't tread on me.
But at the time Night of the Living Dead was made,
I don't think audiences were ready for Night of the Living Dead.
it spoke to its audience in ways few horror films had ever done before.
And I think that's why they were drawn to it.
The first time you saw it, you realized it was making a place for itself in a time capsule of some sort. No movie had that kind of impact at the time.
It was this tiny little movie in Pittsburgh that seemed to have no chance, and it, changed the world.
It was no big thing, man. Who knew that we were ever even going to finish this movie? It was just like a bunch of people getting together and we were going to try to make a movie. And none of us knew that it was ever going to get finished, let alone become something as well known as it is.
George Romero started his first film production company in the city of Pittsburgh in 1963. He called it The Latent Image.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?
We all weaned into the business on Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Almost everybody in Pittsburgh that works in the biz now worked for Fred for a while.
I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you.
Romero and his partners make several short films for the children's television series, including Things That Feel Soft and Mr. Rogers Gets a Tonsillectomy.
And up in the ceiling were some lights I could see, and the kind eyes of the people in the operating room. Even though they wore masks, I could see their kind eyes.
Which remains one of the scariest movies I've ever done.
The Latent Image also finds opportunity in a new industry.
At the time, commercials were live. I mean, beer commercials used to be the sportscaster, Even when you were able to drink, you were actually able to drink beer on camera in a commercial. So these guys, by the time, if a game went in extra innings, it was like... and all of a sudden we come along and say, you can do this shit on film, man.
When you hit a dry spell, what's the natural way to wet it down?
Honey, how about a beer?
With a tall, cold Duke.
Duquesne beer at the time, which is no longer.
Great times, great beer. They go together. And there's no better beer for great times than Iron City.
Iron is still there. Iron, give me an iron.
And how about that Iron City flavor? Rich, robust, delicious.
I could shoot, I could record, I was an editor, I wound up doing it all. So it was all learned by doing. I shot more film at the Latent Image than I've shot, over the course of all of the feature films that I've made. I mean, because we were shooting all the time. In those days, it was all film. So you had to wait for it to come back from the lab, and there were local labs. They were not that reliable. You'd put your heart into shooting this stuff, and the guy would call up and say, you know what, we fucked it up. So, but once the film came back, and as long as it looked okay, man, as soon as the film walked in the door, I'd sit there until it was edited. And I would sit there, sometimes 36, 48 hours, get it done. I basically lived there, and I just lived, breathed, and drank the stuff. No thought for family or whatever. I mean, I just was making movies, man.
Preview Films present The Calgon Story.
We did this thing called The Calgon Story. It was a knockoff of Fantastic Voyage.
Add the Calgon.
And it was the biggest commercial that we'd ever done.
It's working. The gray is gone. The fibers are clean.
Let's get out of here.
I think I'm in love with you.
And they wanted 35, so we sacrificed our profit and went out and bought a 35mm camera. You know, we started to think that we could actually make movies, you know. When we finally had the equipment, and, you know, and we thought that we could make a movie, I had this really high-minded idea to do this Bergman-esque sort of Virgin Spring kind of a movie. And so I wrote this thing about two teenagers in the Middle Ages. I mean, boy, talk about reaching for the moon, right?
Romero's search for investors for his first feature-length screenplay, Wine of the Fawn, ultimately failed.
Eventually, we abandoned it and decided to do, you know, maybe we should do something a little more commercial. And so we decided to do a horror thing. And I had read a novel called I Am Legend, a Richard Matheson novel. And it seemed to me that it was about revolution underneath. But we were also, you know, very aware of the time and the sort of anger of the 60s.
The year was 1967. The U.S. was fighting an increasingly unpopular war in Vietnam. At home in the U.S., despite historic strides made during the Civil Rights era, rampant racism still ruled. After suffering continued unchecked discrimination, African Americans took to the streets. Some called it rioting. Others called it revolution.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brothers. Masses of our people are in the street. They're fighting tit for tat, tooth for tooth, an eye for an eye and a life for a life.
The summer of '67 was the summer of riots in Newark and Detroit, and the idea of the American ghetto really started to take hold in the public consciousness as a kind of symptom of the civil rights movement, whereas, you know, in the 50s and early 60s, it would have been lunch counters and marches in southern cities and buses. Now, it was about anger.
There was a good deal of sort of anger. You know, I think mostly that the 60s didn't work. You know, we thought we had changed the world, or sort of, we're part of some sort of a reform that was gonna, you know, make things better. And all of a sudden, it wasn't any better. It wasn't any different. So, you know, I think there was a bit of rage, a bit of disappointment. So I invented these characters, and in my mind, they were just ghouls. The dead are coming back to life. That's the revolution. That's the big thing that everybody is missing. We just wanted to be, you know, make as ballsy a horror film as we could make.
Romero and 9 other investors, including several partners from the latent Image, form a new company called Image 10. They rent an abandoned farmhouse for the film's primary location.
Initially, 10 of us kicked in $600. It was enough to rent the farmhouse, buy some film stock, and we started to shoot. Started to shoot not knowing whether we were ever going to finish.
Romero is 27 years old.
We lived in that farmhouse, and we had to go out to the little stream in order to, you know, wash off. So it was real guerrilla stuff. I mean, you know, talk about dedication. And everybody went along with this. You know, somehow I would say, hey, guys, it's going to be rough, but, you know, we'll make a movie. And everybody said, all right.
Did that surprise you?
It did. It did completely. I expected people to say, what, are you crazy?
George Romero's jobs include cinematographer, editor, and director.
I didn't know very much then about what was a director supposed to do. I don't know. Walk over here.
I think the first time you try to do anything, especially when you're trying to do something new,
you're learning on the job. And essentially everything that can go wrong will go wrong, whether it's, you know, issues with cameras or cast members who really don't have a lot of experience, crew members who don't quite know what they're doing.
I tried to build a clay hand, and I tried to leave it hollow and fill it with blood. It looks like shit. I mean, it's, you know, it's not great.
There were very few independents being done at that point. And here's a guy in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who gets an idea for a film, manages to raise the small amount of money, and just had the courage, the passion, and the persistence to get it done.
It's really remarkable that a film that has become such a classic came out of an environment where everyone was learning on the job.
Many in the cast and crew take on multiple jobs to make up for the lack in budget. Russ Streiner's duties include producer and actor. John Russo's include co-screenwriter and Zombie.
Initially, I had written it as a short story, so then I started to adapt it into a screenplay. And then we actually had to start to shoot, so Jack Russo took over finishing the screenplay, and we collaborated on it after that point.
Carl Hardman is producer, makeup artist, and actor. Marilyn Eastman is makeup artist and actor.
Carl and Marilyn started this audio production company, so they provided all the audio recording equipment when we made Night of the Living Dead. They did the zombie makeups and just incredibly energetic and, you know, just would do any job that needed to be done.
It was a new impetus for people to, honestly, to fuck the system, you know? It's like we can do this ourselves. We don't have to go to Hollywood with our little script about zombies that everybody would never have supported. It's too freaky. They're too busy making Charlton Heston epics, you know, and Mary Poppins.
Friends, friends of friends, and colleagues comprise the rest of the crew.
Night of the Living Dead was very much a collaborative work. There was a sense of improvisation on the set, which I think helped the movie.
Crews are, you know, it's where it's at, man. I mean, you're reliant on all these people. And it's the only way it happens, ever. You know, you don't make the movie. You don't make the movie. You can't go out and make a movie. You know, you can't make this movie without this guy. And look, he's doing it all. You know, isn't that what that's what it is, man?
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes.
For many, like investor, production director, and actor Vince Cervinsky, this is their first experience with filmmaking.
Vince Cervinsky owned a roller rink in Pittsburgh, and he says, oh, I always wanted to get into movies. Vince was always the go-to guy. I mean, he would get things done. We'd all be sitting around and puzzling, oh, this is a great farmhouse, but you got to wade across a stream to get over there. So Vince said, oh, I'll build a little bridge. And God damn it, with his own hands, he built this little wooden bridge that you could actually drive a car over. Ah, the demolition crew. Vince's brother, Reg, and he had a partner named Tony Pantanello. They used to do fireworks. They were not the Zambellis, but they would, you know, if you needed some fireworks down at your church, you called these guys. They did all of the pyrotechnical stuff, and they were hilarious guys. I mean, you know, Tony would have this cigar constantly burning in his mouth, and he's working, putting fuse together. You know, he couldn't see very well, so he's like this, and here's this cigar. And I'm going, Tony, you're going to blow your fingers off. They did all the squib work and the explosives and all that.
Actor, lighting person, and investor Bill Heinzman and John Russo both volunteer to be set on fire. Given no protective clothing, they simply agree to roll on the grass if they get hot.
Maybe that was Regis' suggestion. Starts to feel hot, just lay down.
What do you think from the supply wagon, Cuss?
No, we're all right. Okay. Hey, Cass, put that thing all the way in the fire. We don't want it getting up again. All right, I got you.
Chief McClellan, how's everything going?
Oh, things aren't going too bad. Men are taking it pretty good. You want to get on the other side of the road over there?
Bill Cardille, who was a TV personality, he came out to be the news guy. And he had to interview Cuss as the sheriff. And so all those lines, the greatest lines in the movie, were all ad-libbed by Cuss.
Are they slow-moving, Chief?
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
You know, it was all that shit was completely off the cuff.
This is Bill Cardille, WIC TV 11 News.
Bill Cardille, almost every Saturday night, he would plug us and say, there's guys in Pittsburgh that are actually making a horror movie. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to appear in it. So we got a little bit of a profile. And because of that profile, I think people believed that we were going to, probably more than us, that we were actually going to finish this movie.
Yeah, Chief, we're going to stay with it till we meet up with the National Guard. Where'd you get the coffee? One of the volunteers. You're doing all the work. You take it.
Bill Cardille came out and brought the camera guy from Channel 11, and he brought his gear.
The helicopter pilot for local radio station KQV lets Russ Streiner ride with him to get aerial shots.
We called police. We got real police to come out and cooperate. I mean, all we had to do was call up and say, hey, guys. You know, and they brought the vans out and with the dogs and everything else. I mean, it was amazing the amount of cooperation that we used to get. I mean, it was incredible. Everybody was sort of, you know, with us because we were trying to actually make a movie.
The dozens of zombies are played by friends, family, local townfolk, and clients of Romero's commercial production company, The Latent Image.
Most of the zombies were people that, you know, we used to work with, you know, people that were giving us jobs, advertising people, a couple of news guys. And a lot of the zombies were clients of ours from ad agencies, humoring us, you know, saying, sure, okay, I'll come out. A woman came out and was willing to, you know, appear nude from behind. I don't know if there's any such thing as a bad zombie. I mean, I love them all. But no, you get people that come out, and if I do anything, if I make a gesture, you know, if I'm talking to the 20 zombies and they're all, you know, looking at me and saying, well, what do I do? Well, you walk over here. And if I go like that, everybody does that. So pretty much, you know, I just say, do whatever you want. Do your best zombie, man. And you see, you get some incredibly creative things. Well, one of the investors, Ross Harris, was a meat packer. So he brought all these entrails, and it was pretty rough. That was all real stuff, real intestines, real livers, cow livers. We wanted to push the envelope. Let's see what we can do with this. So you just bring out buckets of stuff, and people, I'm telling you, boy, people that come to be zombies are, you know, they really dedicate, they'll dig into that stuff and chew on it. And I'm going, oh, you never get me to do that. So.
That's guts. Ew. It's guts.
When I was gonna show it, I'm thinking to myself, they're probably just gonna say, that sucked, Mr. Chris, or whatever it may be. And sure enough, it was the complete opposite. It's amazing the impact that this movie made, that this guy made, with no budget, how it still is important and how it still resonates with everyone who watches it.
When they were dead, they were acting like with no muscles. They had like to stay.
What's
like,
the name of that? What's the name of that?
Stiff.
Starts with an R.
Riga.
Who said it? Riga? The whole curriculum I have with the kids is they learn literacy through the process of making movies. Rigor mortis. Say it again. Say it again.
Rigor mortis.
Say it again.
Rigor mortis.
And what happens with that?
Christopher Cruz teaches his literacy through film program in the Bronx, New York. George Romero grew up in the Bronx before moving to Pittsburgh.
And it was the old days of the Sharks and the Jets, you know. And most people thought I was Italian. So I got away, you know, I think I got away with my hide every once. The Golden Guineas left me alone until they found out I was Spanish. Then I was a shark, you know. You know, I was never into any of that stuff, and I just wanted to make movies.
This movie, to me, what's so gorgeous, even the way it starts, just that road, and then there are different ways to make horror films. What I enjoy about this is right away the music is very disturbing and telegraphs that you're getting into something that's going to be scary. But then, you know, they go to a graveyard, and then they have their little dialogue about the length of the trip, and they got started late and so on.
They ought to make the day the time changes, the first day of summer.
What?
Well, it's 8 o'clock and it's still light.
A lot of good the extra daylight does us.
Now, we've still got a 3-hour drive back. We're not going to be home until after midnight.
So it's mundane, you know, there's a mundanity to it, and that is, I think, a very modern approach.
Even follow a bunch of sort of like low-budget films of basically like, you know, white girls in bikinis running away from guys wearing shag carpeting, being some kind of monster.
Before night, audiences of horror were accustomed to space aliens, radioactive mutations, and traditional Gothic monsters.
And by not doing that kind of stuff, by making it just as real as possible, it became this whole other thing.
It's not even a haunted cemetery. It looks like a big open place where they can park their car and go to a grave and it'll be fine.
It's still spooky, the music is indicating something to come, but it's essentially a day-in-the-life episode of these characters.
Well, you used to really be scared here.
Johnny.
You're still afraid.
It's, to me, one of the first sort of postmodern horror movies in that it is commenting on itself.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
That's what's so brilliant about the famous line, "They're coming to get you, Barbara," is that he's commenting on a horror movie.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
Now, of course, years later, we have Scream and other films like that, and they're self-reflexive, but in this obnoxious nudge, nudge, wink, wink way, where it's like the audience, you know, oh, we've seen all this before, let's make fun of the characters. That's not how it functions in this movie. It functions as two people who, you know, the brother is kind of teasing and trying to scare his sister, and then when it comes true, to me, this is absolutely stunningly awesome.
The horror just came out of nowhere. It just sort of shocked you.
It scared me to death.
It disorients you just right from the beginning of the movie. You're being told that places that shouldn't be very scary are actually going to be really scary. Situations where you should feel safe, you're not going to feel safe.
The new horror comes stumbling towards them, which is the zombie. And he really reinvents the zombie. And the zombie becomes one of the great new monsters.
The image of the zombie in the cemetery is a key image we all felt was so iconic. And we patterned our zombies for the series of The Walking Dead after that zombie. We patterned both in terms of this kind of gait, his speed. Not only is it creepy, but it just seems like it's unrelenting. You know, he's not going to stop.
Before Night of the Living Dead, there were movies like I Walk with the Zombie. They were this sort of tribal character, very different. Now, arguably, the zombie is as important as the werewolf, but right below the vampire is probably the most important horror monster in the history of scary movies. All these zombies all go back to Romero. There's no movie director that's responsible for the vampire. There's no movie director that's responsible for Frankenstein. There's no movie director that's responsible for the werewolf. There's people who've made key movies of that, but those are much older characters which have this kind of literary pedigree. And while there have been undead and zombies, etc., what we know of as a zombie, you know, the kind of the it's alive moment of it was, you know, 1968, George Romero in Night of the Living Dead in Pittsburgh.
Dead face. Hold it. Don't smile. Smiling is your enemy. Follow the sound, guys. What are George Romero rules of zombies? All right.
That zombies, they walk slow. They drag their feet when they're walking.
Jerry, what else?
And they'll smile or laugh.
They don't smile or laugh.
When they're human, the way they die is the way they're gonna stay when they're a zombie until they turn into dust.
What is the purpose of a zombie? Aria.
They like to eat people. They don't live to do anything else. They just like to eat and eat and eat.
You guys remember what I said? The need to feed?
Yeah.
Remember? Yeah. Say it again. The need to
feed.
Say it again.
The need to feed.
Again.
The need to feed.
That is it.
To me, there's something definitive and classical about the terror and the simplicity. It's not overblown. She gets in the car, what do? You undo the clutch, she goes, and then she blows it and runs into the tree. I mean, oh my God. Every shot does feel iconic at this point, and I'm speaking of these first 10 minutes. Every shot is iconic.
It doesn't feel storyboarded. Everything feels organically, like it's organically unfolding.
She sees the lonely house in the distance, and that's sort of another iconic shot. This, to me, is one of the great sequences in any movie.
Duane Jones, a classically trained actor, played the role of Ben, the hero.
One of the things amazing to me when I saw it, and it really blew my mind, was the fact that no one reacts to Duane Jones or the character as a black man.
It's all right. It really wasn't an audition. You know, we never auditioned Duane. He was just a beautifully impressive guy. He was really a beautiful person, too. The script wasn't written, the character wasn't described as white, black, or yellow, red, whatever, anything. And we thought we were doing the right thing by not changing the script when we decided to use Duane.
Here is a white woman, very pale, blonde woman, who runs into a house and is rescued by a black man. And there is no reaction.
This pump out here is locked. Is there a key?
She's out of it, she's scared, she's frightened, but not of him.
Which, in 1968, as strange as it seems, was still something that the average audience really would have noticed. It would have registered to them as something different.
It felt like such a modern movie in that, obviously, it was never remarked upon that he was black. Nobody ever said anything about it the way it did in other movies. And you keep in mind, this is a time where there's a hugely popular TV show, The Andy Griffith Show, taking place in the South, and there were no black people in it. So to have this mainstream culture refuse to acknowledge any kind of black catalyst and to have it there and not be remarked upon, it really felt like a brand new day.
I don't think anyone had ever seen anything like that in the 60s.
Chiz Schultz produced television specials starring Harry Belafonte in the late 1960s.
We had Petula Clark, who was the top British singer at the time, and they had a number together, and at one point toward the end, Harry links arms with Petula and they sing the final verse. And we finished dress rehearsal, and the man in charge of advertising for Chrysler said, Belafonte cannot touch Petula Clark. And we were sort of in shock. And Belafonte said, I'm not sure I understood you. What are you saying? He said, there will be no touching of Miss Clark. Remember, we have to sell cars in the South. And Harry said, give me just a minute. And he called the president of Chrysler. And he said, you should know that I'm calling a press conference in 10 minutes to say that Chrysler will not allow me to touch Petula Clark. We went into airtime, the taping. Harry and Petula linked arms. But that was not unusual. That was the atmosphere of the time.
We were only a year past Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which had made its entire subject the shockingness of interracial marriage.
Mom, this is John.
Dr. Prentice, I'm so pleased to meet you.
I'm pleased to meet you, Mrs. Drayton.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was criticized for taking pains not to offend white moviegoers and for being out of touch with the racial storms of 1967.
And it never occurred to me that I might fall in love with a Negro.
Of Sidney Poitier's character, H. Rap Brown said, even George Wallace would love that nigger. This kind of criticism wasn't new to Poitier.
I remember watching Sidney Poitier in the Stanley Kramer film, The Defiant Ones. And it was him and Tony Curtis playing these two convicts who escaped from the chain gang. And they're near the very end of the film. They're trying to get to this railroad, right? But Tony can't hold on. He can't, the train's moving too fast. Instead of Sidney letting Tony drop, Sidney falls off too. And then you see the last scene is Sidney's cradling Tony Curtis in his arms, and he starts singing a song.
If I ever do see his face once more, he never get home again. That judge.
Cradling Tony, you know, as the law enforcement people come down on them. And I remember thinking back then when I was 15 or 16 years old, Sidney, were you crazy, man? Let that white man go. Save yourself, you know? Because it was like he was always becoming, by that time, he was becoming sort of like this savior.
African-American heroes in the mid-60s in movies were allowed to be really smart. They weren't necessarily allowed to be aggressive or strong or tough. I mean, Poitier started to break that barrier in The Heat of the Night. The most he could do was slap a white man in the face after he is slapped in the face by that white man.
Poitier played a detective who in this scene dared to interrogate a rich white man.
You saw it.
I saw it.
The slap was an electric moment in 1967.
Then all of a sudden, Dwayne Jones is like the lead, basically, in an all-white film. But he comes across as a very strong, focused character.
Dwayne was very upset when he had to do anything violent. He was, you know, a very sensitive kind of a guy.
And what's a really telling scene is when he slaps the woman. It's even more intense than when Sidney hits what's-his-name, and in The Heat of the Night, he really slapped her.
And particularly, you know, I'm gonna slap a white woman and then shoot a white guy. And I'm gonna be in trouble.
And then when he shoots the guy, you know, he shoots the guy. I said, this is a bold black man for 1967, very bold.
You would never put Night of the Living Dead on the spectrum of blaxploitation and black power movies that started to happen in the late 60s and early 70s. But in a way, you know, it precedes Shaft, it precedes Superfly, it precedes all of those movies where the African-American main character was suddenly no longer accommodationist and exceptional and polite.
He's black. He's brutal. He's boss.
But, you know, tough and empowered.
I mean, of course, we discussed it, and Dwayne, as I said, was the most sensitive among us to the racial issue and, you know, how some of that stuff might resonate when we were saying, wait, it was in the script, you know, before the guy was black. And, you know, but he was saying, yeah, but he is black now. And so you have to think about that. And as I said, I've in recent years come to the thought that maybe we should have explored the racial issue a little bit. We thought we were being really hip by not changing the script.
I think it's also what made the movie feel like it belonged to another generation. That sense of not wringing its hands and having to stop for a moment as they're all being pilloried by zombies and said, you know, Ben, when I was a boy, we had a colored maid and she never worked as hard as you did for us. I mean, by not having a scene like that, it felt exciting and new. It truly did.
Hold it! Don't shoot! We're from town. A radio.
One great thing about Night of the Living Dead is that it does resort to the cliche of like, well, everybody would put aside their differences in the face of such a big threat.
How long you guys been down there? I could use some help up here. That's the cellar. It's the safest place.
Which is this hokey thing that horror movies and sci-fi movies still do. That no matter, you know, how much you may differ in real life, all that's going to get cast aside because you have to fight the monster or fight the alien or whatever.
The cellar. The cellar, there's only one door, right? Just one door, that's all we have to protect. Tom and I fixed it so it locks and boards from the inside. But up here, all these windows, why, we'd never know where they were going to hit us next.
You got a point, Mr. Cooper. But down in the cellar, there's no place to run to.
Romero actually suggests that, nope, it's going to be embedded even in the way you choose to fight, even in where you choose to hide.
The cellar is the strongest place. The cellar is a death trap.
Who you are in real life is going to absolutely affect how you treat this threat and how you see this threat.
You put people in this incredibly extreme circumstance, and you know, what kind of society do they create? And that's the heart of Night of the Living Dead.
You two can do whatever you like. I'm going back down to the cellar, and you better decide. Because I'm going to board up that door, and I'm not going to unlock it again no matter what happens.
Some parts of the movie almost play like Beckett. You know, that sense of what happens when you trap people together and they just have to deal with themselves. And that being that sense of anticipation and absurdity, just knowing that there's no place to go.
And slowly, there's cracks in the crevices. And the hands start coming through, and they're trying to get the hands out. And he shoots the guy a couple times. The guy won't die until he shoots him in the head.
To kill them, they need to chop off their heads.
Or what?
Or just shoot them in the brain, because the way they work is by the brain.
You usually have to throw fire so you could save yourself or somebody else.
Then they see the news report.
It's on, it's on.
We've never had the budgets to really explore that. This is a worldwide phenomenon.
Reports, incredible as they seem.
We did it mostly with media, what they were hearing on the radio and on the TV. Otherwise, it was all the farmhouse.
The wave of murder which is sweeping the eastern third of the nation is being committed by creatures who feast upon the flesh of their victims.
Chuck Craig was an actual newsman, the guy that has most of the airtime in the movie.
First eyewitness accounts of this grisly development came from people who were understandably frightened and almost incoherent.
Wrote his own copy, read the script, and we sat around and, you know, we bullshit about the concept and what was going on.
It's hard for us here to believe what we're reporting to you, but it does seem to be a fact.
That stuff has a ring of authenticity about it because Chuck did it himself.
The kind of low-key realism of those broadcasts and of those newsrooms absolutely is intended to situate the movie in reality.
That sort of unfiltered sense of nobody spinning the news, just reporting it.
It's saying, you know, if this were happening in your town, this is what your newscast would look like.
Major contact came in a pre-dawn attack by a...
I think the newscasts that were created for Night of the Living Dead are in sync with the kind of newscast that I was seeing, my generation was seeing on television when we used to watch Morally Safer, out in Vietnam and the bush and stuff.
Vietnam was America's first televised war. And while the networks systematically downplayed the bloodshed, viewers, for the first time in TV history, got glimpses of what war was really like.
I think that the news coverage of the Vietnam War was unlike news coverage from ever before. I remember just the amount of dead.
All law enforcement agencies and the military have been organized to search out and destroy the marauding ghouls.
Particularly when you saw the stuff with the vigilantes getting prepared and stuff. It made me think of the stuff that I would see on the television stuff, the Newark riots, of Watts. It was all happening then. You know, you saw a National Guard on the street. You saw looting and stuff. So it all was very reminiscent of that stuff. I mean, it was obviously of those times.
I grew up in Detroit in 1967. I remember that summer being terrified. There's a famous story about a house in my neighborhood that somebody was hiding out in the house. There were a bunch of, you know, National Guardsmen, which is to say teenagers with guns who'd probably been like jacked up on coffee and up for 2 days in a row. There's a guy lighting a cigarette hiding out in an attic. They thought somebody fired a gun, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition were expended on this house. That this guy wasn't killed is a complete miracle. I mean, they shot the house up so much, it almost took the top of it off. So to see that stuff in the movie, and also see that stuff in the movie with a black guy in it, it's like a wealth of social consciousness in filmmaking. It was so many things that I don't think anybody could ever do again.
In other words, you feel that the radiation on the Venus probe is enough to cause these mutations? There was a very high degree of radiation.
Well, just a minute. I'm not sure that that's certain at all. I don't think that...
Big traditional institutions, whether it's the government or the army or network television, are utterly unable to be counted upon. Not only counted upon to stop it, but counted upon even to explain it. So there's this great sense of just, and this is very 1968, a great sense of the complete ineffectuality of any institution that purveys itself to you as being trustworthy.
I must disagree with these gentlemen presently until this is irrefutably proved.
Everything is being done that can be done.
I think there's one other big departure from convention, specifically from horror convention, which is that if that movie had been made 10 years earlier or even 5 years earlier, there would have been like a voodoo potion.
Combining voodoo witchery with the most advanced of medical sciences.
Or a curse, or an evil professor, or an incantation.
Genius or madman?
Romero sort of tosses that all aside. You don't ever get an official, confirmed explanation of what's happening.
God changed the rules. You know, that's the only explanation that I need. No more room in hell.
You can see what it is. You can't see why it is.
It's so indeterminate that you can't protect yourself.
And you're not given anything about why it is that would make you more comfortable watching it.
And it doesn't matter to me. It's happening, and it's probably, at least in my mythology, it's probably some sort of permanent condition. I don't know, unless we redeem ourselves somehow.
Stay tuned to the broadcasting stations in your local area for this list of rescue stations.
Maybe we can get to a safe shelter, get gas in the car.
Look for the name of the rescue station nearest you and make your way to that location as soon as possible.
So we have that truck. If we can get some gas, we can get out of here.
This is great story logic, you know. Great plot unfolding and great story logic.
And there's a key on here that's labeled for the gas pump out back.
So they said we have the key, right?
After we get the gas and get back into the house, then we'll worry about getting everybody into the truck.
So then they create this diversion with the Molotov cocktails. And you see, I remember this, right? Dwayne and the guy run out, get in the car. The girl now, she panics. She doesn't want to be without the boyfriend. She runs and jumps in the car, right? They get to the gas tank.
Come on! This key won't work. Watch it.
Dwayne shoots the lock off.
Watch the torch!
So they've had the problem with the gasoline soaking the car. I hate it when that happens. But they're aware they need to get out of that frickin' truck. So they're getting out, and then she goes, oh, well, my sweater's stuck. Come on, come on.
My jacket's caught.
And you're like, your sweater's stuck, well, that's it. Boom. It's understanding how to portray the little things that go wrong that really can screw you in this sort of scary environment, giving it an incredibly timeless and special quality.
And they start devouring the meat. But then you see that they're growing in force. So earlier, Dwayne says only 8 or 10 zombies become 16 zombies, then 20 zombies. It grows and grows.
Once you saw the violence, once you saw the extent they were going to go to show the gore, the audience at the time said, well, if they're going to show a kid chomping on her father, and they're going to show it in this detail, you know, what else are they going to show me? And that's terrifying.
This film and the structure, the morality, who lives and who dies, is not based on whether you're a good person, whether you work hard or fight hard. I mean, a child killing her mother, that is the violence that we're experiencing in that scene, more so than someone being attacked by a trowel. That scene is just devastating because the mother is very adoring. That remains one of the most shocking things I've ever seen. And I'll tell you what, it's not because you see the gore. What's beautiful is it's the sound. The knife never touches the flesh.
And when they break through in that last scene, and the girl's trying to stop them, and they break in, and the brothers with the glove.
Barbara gets it from her own brother. This irony is so profoundly, it's disturbing. And once again, it's not deserved. When you play with the expectations of the classic structure, and then you defy them and the wrong person gets killed, this is what's upsetting. That's what haunts. That's what creates a feeling of dread. I mean, we've lost various of our heroes along the way, but Ben is still at it. And there's that scene when he just has to go into the basement. I mean, he's fought this whole time about not going down there, or that it's a last resort. And when you realize that's what he's gonna do, it's just an incredibly horrific shot of all the zombies just busting in. They've broken through the membrane.
In the time that The Night of the Living Dead came out, you don't feel safe in your home anymore. You know, there are things that are overtaking us over which we have no control. And there's that fear, and I think that the zombie apocalypse takes inspiration from that fear, and it's why audiences connect with it in a way that is not quite obvious on the surface, but is really in the subtext.
It's an unsettling element of the movie that the people who seem most likely to be able to thwart this incursion of the living dead, it looked like a lynch mob. The resonance for people who would have spent the last 10 years watching, you know, white Southerners vow to prevent the desegregation of schools, for instance, it would have been really pretty clear. And Dogs and Night of the Living Dead, there's a very specific cultural resonance. You know, black men being chased by dogs is one of the ugliest images of the civil rights movement and was very much part of the national visual vocabulary of any moviegoer other than a very little kid who would have gone to see this movie. And again, it connects to this idea that it's not as simple as the good guys versus the undead. There are the good guys, the not good guys, and the living dead.
They seem to be getting a certain amount of pleasure out of putting down these monsters and being able to go out and hunt people and lynch people.
They seemed really real to me. They felt real, those guys. I wasn't sure they were actors.
It's a really interesting, squirmy political aspect of the movie that's intentionally unsettling. I think Romero wants you to feel uncomfortable with the fact that the so-called victors at the end of the movie are exactly the kind of people you're inclined not to root for.
You, drag that out of here and throw it on the fire. Nothing down here? All right, go ahead down and give him a hand. Let's go check out the house. There's something there. I heard a noise. All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes. Good shot.
That was, you know, sort of the ironic ending. He refuses to go downstairs. Finally, he survives by going downstairs, and when he comes back up, he gets gunned down because he's mistaken for one of the living dead.
Okay, he's dead. Let's go get him. That's another one for the fire.
So, yeah, that ending was there before we ever cast Dwayne.
And that was the only time, for me, I put a racial thing to it. You know, like, they saw him, he didn't yell out, he was a black man, and they shot him.
My favorite scene was probably when the African man got shot, when he wasn't even a zombie.
I thought they should know if he's a zombie or not, because if they knew he was a zombie, they would have the zombie would have attacked them already and walked toward them. But all he did is stand up, and they just shot him.
A lot of people talked about that as a lynching and saw a political thread in it. I think it's more of a shock in terms of the way it violates your sense of narrative expectation than politically.
When our protagonist does get shot, utterly arbitrarily, I think that's way beyond a racist issue. That's Romero just speaking from the times about a bleakness that the culture was suffering.
If he had survived, it would have been dishonest. I mean, even as a kid, and I was, you know, propping my eyes up with toothpicks trying not to sleep for a couple of nights after, it felt like that was the most honest thing to do.
You know, it's a tradition in films that you can escape. There's always the idea you can escape. You might leave your past. If you were, you know, involved with the mob, you would leave and you'd have a new beginning. It's a tradition all the way back to Homer, the new beginning. You go home and you start again, you refresh and you start again. But of course, the apocalyptic filmmakers take that away from you. No, tomorrow may not come the way you're planning on it. You may not have another chance.
The only reason to do the fantasy film or a horror film is to sort of upset the order, upset the balance of things. And it seemed to me that the formula was always to restore order, you know, put it back the way it was, which seems, you know, counterproductive to what you're doing initially. And which is why it made sense to me to have, have the Night of the Living Dead have this, you know, sort of tragic and ironic ending.
The credits roll seconds after Ben's death. It's shockingly blasé and detached.
It's as businesslike as anything else in the film. It may be the most emotionless horror film of all time. If it had been Sidney Poitier in the movie, he would have done that thing and waved to everybody and thrown his trench coat over his shoulder and walked off into the distance as the haunting love theme by Lulu piped into theaters to remind us of the feat he'd accomplished. And you know, it just felt so right. It was a thing that was probably more exciting to everybody when I finally caught what people did see it. Wasn't it great that he does everything, then he gets shot, not only shot, but right in the head. So it's not like you miss it. And it's
Let's go, man.
completely terrifying and the perfect ending.
Hey, Randy, light these torches over here. People in the back, way in the back.
He really offered no comforts for the audience at all.
You know? No, but there's always the refreshment stand.
Principal photography for Night of the Living Dead wrapped in November of 1967. As Romero edited, the search for investors continued.
And at first, people had no faith that we could actually make a movie. And it was only when we were able to actually show some dailies and, you know, people saw that, you know, the lips were in sync with the sound. And, you know, they were able to say, it looks like a movie. And we said, what's what we're trying to tell you? One of these days, it's going to grow up to be a movie. And, you know, so money dribbled in over the course of several months. And we were never certain that we were ever going to get enough to finish it. We didn't have money for the sound mix. So Russ Streiner challenged the guy who owns the lab to a chess match. And at stake was the sound mix. And Russ beat the guy and won the sound mix. So, I mean, this is the kind of shit that we were going through, man.
In January 1968, Vietnamese revolutionary forces mounted a coordinated attack on over 100 South Vietnamese cities and towns, including the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. It was called the Tet Offensive, and it brought some of the most disturbing images to date to primetime television. For many, the war seemed more dangerous and pointless than ever. Still, it would continue until 1975. President Lyndon B. Johnson seemed better at facing facts when it came to domestic policy. He commissioned a study to investigate the causes of the nation's race riots. An unflinching wake-up call, the Kerner Commission report warned that our nation is moving towards two societies, one white, one black, separate and unequal. Regarding the ghetto, it stated, white institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. And while black militancy may have added fuel to the riots, the primary cause was white racism.
We are moving toward two societies, separate and unequal, and if something isn't done to stop this in a very determined manner, things can really get worse.
A few days later, Night of the Living Dead was finally completed. Image 10 still needed a distributor for the film. With the hope of finding one in New York City, Romero and Streiner pick up the first finished print from the lab.
Threw it in the trunk of the car, finished answer print, drove it to New York to see if anybody wanted to show it. And then Russ and I are driving to New York, and we hear on the radio that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And, you know, of course, we have this sort of angry film that, you know, that's like, it has this 60s stuff in it. We had a black lead, Dwayne, and, you know.
Several distributors considered the film. It did not ignite a bidding war.
I think Romero was working against all kinds of prejudices against what he was trying to do. If you've never made a film, you can't make a film. You've got to have a whole succession of films in order to make a film. I think he was working against the fact that you have to have millions of dollars to make a feature film. Well, you don't.
The movie, I think, only cost $114,000. That's a very, very low budget now. It was also a very, very low budget then. I think in '67, the average studio movie probably cost about $3 or $3.5 million. So 114,000 is nothing. The movie's in black and white at a moment when just about everything in movies had switched over to color. A black and white movie in 1968 was less playable. Theaters were less interested in booking it. Of course, he was working with a cast of unknowns. That adds up to a very tough set of circumstances, especially when you're effectively rebooting a genre that hasn't done much for the last several years.
Columbia, I think, was the first place we went to, and they actually held it for a little while, and it looked as if they were really seriously thinking about releasing it.
Columbia turned it down. American International Pictures, known for low-budget biker, psychedelic, and Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe movies, said they'd release it, but under one condition.
They wanted to change the ending. They said it's just too dark, and, so, we boldly said, forget about it. This is our movie. And we walked. And, we never got the time of day from anybody else for a while. And we finally hired, someone recommended a sales agent, somebody whose business it is to go and, try to find distribution. And so we hired this guy, and he took it and eventually got a deal with Walter Reed.
Night of the Living Dead was first released in theaters and drive-ins on October 2nd, 1968.
When we first saw Night of the Living Dead, we went out to a drive-in to watch it. That was the first time we said, it really is a movie, isn't it? Because we were able to go to the drive-in and, buy some dogs and some popcorn and check out Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead in New York was treated as a grindhouse movie, and it was booked as a grindhouse movie. It played at the New Amsterdam Theater on 42nd Street, which was like a seventh run, like a bad theater.
New York's 42nd Street was the epicenter of the grindhouse circuit.
These are all exploitation films that have no artistic ambition.
You can't escape the shock.
I'm gonna give you the time of your life, baby.
That have no political meaning, that are probably morally bankrupt.
Night of the Living Dead, honestly, was the kind of movie that critics mostly dismissed.
Of the Living Dead.
It was in a very disreputable genre.
Horror was a dirty business right next to porn in terms of how the movies were made, how they were financed, where they were shown in drive-ins.
Variety called Night of the Living Dead an unrelieved orgy of sadism, which casts serious aspersions on the integrity and social responsibility of its Pittsburgh-based makers.
Anyone who did review it reviewed it in that way, sort of really angrily.
It was dismissed in the New York Times in a tiny, tiny review by Vincent Canby.
Canby's three-sentence review began with, Night of the Living Dead is a grainy little movie acted by what appear to be non-professional actors who are besieged in a farmhouse by some other non-professional actors who stagger around stiff-legged, pretending to be flesh-eating ghouls.
He writes in this tone that he can't really believe that he's been dispatched to have to write about this thing, and probably had to go spend a miserable day at the New Amsterdam Theater on 42nd Street sitting through it.
Along with the grindhouse circuit, Night was booked for afternoon matinees. Throughout the 60s, horror movies, fan magazines, and toys were marketed primarily to children.
You'll cringe in terror when you see our Screaming Mimi show.
In 1968, parents felt safe dropping their kids off for an afternoon of horror.
Their most recent experience would have been something like the Roger Corman, Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, which were fun, and they were even a little scary, but they were basically horror movies you could almost take kids to. So here comes Night of the Living Dead. I can't imagine what children, by the time you get to the sort of flesh feast where they're eating, whatever they're eating, and this naked, zombie staggering toward the house, you were like way out of the realm of anything that had happened in horror.
Critic Roger Ebert attended one of these matinees. He wrote in the Chicago Sun-Times, "I don't think the younger kids knew what hit them. This was ghouls eating people up, and you could actually see what they were eating. This was little girls killing their mothers. I felt real terror in that neighborhood theater. I saw kids who had no resources they could draw upon to protect themselves from the dread and fear they felt. I suppose the idea was to make a fast buck, but I don't know how I could explain it to kids who left the theater with tears in their eyes."
It was so many people running out of the theater in the hallway of the movies. That was the first movie I ever seen people running out the movie. I remember the girl that was in front of us, she put the coat over her head and was running out falling. The name of the theater was called Adams. It was in Newark, New Jersey, downtown Newark. I had to be 10, my oldest brother had to be 11, and he cried worse than all of us. And my younger brother, it didn't bother him. As of the day, he liked scary movies.
I might have been 12, 13. The driving movie was the Whitestone Drive-In in the Bronx. The part where the little girl, she's like eating the father. And that was like really horrible.
It took me a long time to get to sleep at night. And when the lights was off, it was hard for us. You know, I remember a few times I went to bed because I was scared to get up to go to the bathroom because I always thought the Night of the Living Dead was in the other room.
Yeah, you feel so like, oh my God, they're coming, you know, they're gonna come to get me and eat me up.
An abridged version of Roger Ebert's review was published nationwide in Reader's Digest magazine. In spite of this warning to parents, the film did so well that the National Association of Theater Owners selected it as their exploitation picture of the month.
It was playing like in the drive-in circuit. It wasn't the first one film in the bill. It was the last film. So consequently, it was on like late when everybody was asleep in the car.
Elvis Mitchell first saw Night when he was 10 years old at a drive-in in Detroit.
The sheer excitement of seeing a movie like that, I mean, as terrifying as it was, it felt like it belonged to you. You know, it felt like this generational shift in filmmaking. If there had been more resources devoted to the movie and more consideration, and it wasn't like run-and-gun filmmaking, if it wasn't like, you know, hearing Public Enemy for the first time, or for my parents' generation, seeing Elvis Presley for the first time, and just that kind of, oh my God, that electricity.
In 1969, Walter Reed re-released Night on a new double bill.
They played it with slaves? I mean, I couldn't believe that, you know? What? Slaves and Night of the Living Dead? How does that connect?
But it was at this double feature where George Abagnale, critic for Andy Warhol's ultra-hip interview magazine, saw Night. He wrote, "It should open at an art house and run for at least a month because it is a work of art." And when the film got to Europe in 1970, the prestigious French film journal Positif called it enriching, extraordinary, a miracle.
Of course, the moment that stuff starts happening, then everybody over here says, well, maybe I should take a look at this. But a bunch of people jumped on the bandwagon, Rex Reed, all that. And Roger did a mea culpa, said he didn't understand it.
Roger Ebert would later write, "If I were to rate it today, I'd give it 3.5 stars. The Museum of Modern Art in New York played Night to a standing room only crowd. The film would eventually become part of its permanent collection."
But then the whole copyright issue came up, and that was the end of that.
When Romero and Striner were shopping their film around, its original title was The Night of the Flesh Eaters.
And we put the little copyright bug, the C with the circle around it, on the title. It was over a live-action picture, one of the early shots of the car in the cemetery. And when they put the new title on, which was their title, Night of the Living Dead, the copyright thing came off. And they never noticed that there wasn't one. And so that's the way it is. And people are all around the world said, wait, there's no copyright on this movie anyway. So basically, it became public domain. Stupid mistake.
Image 10 received no royalties for the huge ticket sales in Europe. Their attempt to sue the distributor ended when Walter Reed filed for bankruptcy. pirated copies of Night played worldwide. It's impossible to know how much money it's made. As the war grinded on into the 1970s, so did Night of the Living Dead. Its midnight show is making it a cult institution.
You want to own it. You want it to belong to you. You want to believe there's a part of pop culture that still kind of comes through the back door, that isn't heralded and isn't having all of its fun taken out of it before it gets to you. And that's one of the things that that movie really had, and for a long time.
And as history unfolded, events seemed to vindicate, time and again, Night's suspicion of authority and unmitigated bleakness.
All these things made you think, oh my God, I'm not alone. Finally, you almost feel like Ben. There are like-minded people. There's this cult of other people like me, or people who know how to fold this into a movie. You wanted to see that.
For the British Film Institute's Sight and Sound, Elliot Stein wrote, "Who are these ghouls? Who are these saviors? All of them so horrifying, so convincing, who mow down, defoliate, and gobble up everything in their path."
You know, 1968 was a moment when everybody was reading political messages into every film. And I think it is a political movie. And one reason that Night of the Living Dead worked so well is because everyone in America thought some version of this country is going to hell. The lunatics are taking over. Conservative older people thought that, and progressive young people thought that that had been true for a long time. And on that political front, the movie plays perfectly to both audiences.
Night of the Living Dead, metaphorically in a funny way, were all of these fears rising up and coming at them. And they weren't coming at heroes or wealthy people or this, they were coming at the common American. I mean, the young woman who plays the lead, the couple who's in the house, they're just that average working class American. And here were these fearful things coming to not only kill them, but to eat them. So it fulfilled, I think, a kind of pervasive fear that existed in the country at the time among normal working people.
There was this sense of chaos and sense of tension, you know, in the American fabric, you know, which means things were going to change. So I think that what Romero was doing with Night of the Living Dead, it sort of points to, you know, this unraveling.
It's the unraveling of everything that we like to believe is our comfort zone and our safety.
Night of the Living Dead's cynicism and ferocious intensity was reflected in many of the films that followed in the 1970s. Like Night, these films shattered all the things that kept us safe in traditional Hollywood movies. Heroism, teamwork, science, young love, the patriarchal family, the media, the government, and the police and military.
There's really a fragility to our society, and then you realize, well, in fact, I must guard it. I must be vigilant. And then you get into why horror stories can actually have a positive message, if you will, a positive effect, which is to say, here is a cautionary tale. Do not take anything for granted. Because one day a zombie may wander up, and you may make fun of the person who's afraid, but they could be right, and then things could go from bad to worse.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Hungry and cold like a fallen soldier.
when you got zombie #1, Bill Hinsman. Night of the Living Dead. Started it all 40 years ago.
My role in Night of the Living Dead was the graveyard zombie. And the graveyard zombie scene was the last scene that was shot. And throughout the film, I was a crew member, of course, and an investor in the film. And throughout the film, I was jumping in to fill a part as a zombie. I was tall and skinny and had an old suit. So it was pretty appropriate. But anyway, when the time came to film the final scene, George says, "You really look good as a zombie. Do you want to do the graveyard zombie?" I said, "Yeah, sure." You know, sometimes I really do blush, I think, under the makeup, you know, because it's really kind of embarrassing. I'm sure you've heard the story where actors are always afraid they're going to get discovered, that they don't have any talent or anything, you know. And it's like, sometimes I feel that way. I'm a little embarrassed sometimes because, you know, every Sunday night I got to take the damn garbage out. And on the way out, I'll go, "I'm a legend. What the hell am I taking garbage out for?" You know? Why aren't I rich? But that's life. But it's so much fun to do these things. You know, just especially if I'm depressed about something. You know, my wife kicks me out every once in a while. I say, "Go to one of the events and get your ego built back up." Okay.